So in this video, we're going to talk about disinformation and how to think about disinformation. And it's really important that we do this because if we aren't conscious about why we're thinking the way that we are, we tend to just buy things that we wouldn't otherwise just imbibe. Okay, so here's the article that I want to look at. This is a Fight for Your Way of Life, Lithuania's culture minister on Ukraine and Russian disinformation. Okay, so in March 1990, Lithuania became the first nation to declare its independence as the Soviet Union collapsed. Now, Poland had done this before, but Poland was a Warsaw Pact nation. Lithuania was actually enfolded into what was the former Soviet Union. And so they were the first one. They read the Constitution and were like, we're a collection of free and independent states. And they're like, voluntary independent states. We'd like to leave now. And so they decided they're going to leave. The Russians sent tanks to confront the Lithuanians. The good people of Vilnius, that's their capital, came out and wrapped arms around rows deep of humans protecting the parliamentarians inside the Seimas, that's their parliament building, and Gorbachev blinked. Okay, March 1990, Lithuania became the first nation to declare its independence as the Soviet Union collapsed, setting an example for other states that had been under the Kremlin's influence for half a century. But Vilnius once again became a target for Moscow. Russia had launched a disinformation campaign and aimed at Kyiv's allies in the West. And so, most notably, they came after Lithuania's Minister of Culture. Russian authorities placed Lithuania's culture minister, Simonas Kairys. Pretty much everything ends in S for some reason. I've been to Lithuania 3 times, and they wanted to call me Darrenis, and that sounded weird to my ear, but saying Darren sounded very weird to their ear, like I was not masculine if I didn't end in AS. By the way, I know of just a few words, which are labas. So if you're Lithuanian and you're watching this, labas. And I also know toiletas, which I'm pretty sure you can find out, and it's a really, really useful word. Okay, at any rate, back to this. They put the culture minister, the Estonian prime minister, and others on this wanted list. Now, why would they put him on this wanted list? Okay, on being informed that his name was listed, culture minister Kairys said, "I'm glad that my work in dismantling the ruins of Sovietization has not gone unnoticed." It's a good place to be if the Soviets don't like you as you're fighting their propaganda. So there's an interview here. It's been lightly edited. They ask him, what historical narratives, by the way, this is in France 24, what historical narratives has Russia tried to distort when it comes to Lithuanian independence? So Kairys answers, Russia is still in imperialism mode. Now, this is really interesting. The way that Russia is viewing the world, still they're thinking, well, we're Russia, and so you ought to be under our thumb. Think how they're treating the Ukrainians. Think how they're treating the Moldovans. Think how they're treating the Georgians. And think how they would treat other countries if they could. They still have this, we are Russia, and why aren't you bowing to us kind of view of the world. The belief that countries that were formerly part of the Soviet Union, sovereign and independent countries such as Lithuania, are still part of Russia. Russia has its own law system, which from their point of view is the law even in free countries. So they're putting people on a wanted list for breaking what would be Russian law in a totally different country. So if you're in Lithuania or Estonia, but you're breaking a law that's denigrating the military, they're saying you're breaking the law. But if you're in Russia, yes, but if you're in Lithuania, no. If they say, for example, that they are protecting objects of Soviet heritage in a foreign country like Lithuania, they're spreading the belief that it's not a free country. But we are not slaves. Now listen, the way that the Russians are thinking about the world is that, well, there are Russians in Lithuania. We need to protect them. Right? There are Russians in Ukraine. We need to protect them. They are Russians and you can't do, right? So it's really bizarre how they're still thinking about this. Why is combating Russian disinformation essential for Lithuanian national security? Well, it's not just Lithuanian national security, and that's the first point and the most important point here. It's not important for Lithuania. It's important for the EU, for Europe, and for the entire world. Yes, it is. And combating this disinformation is really important because these and I would say elections have consequences, but I know that we're dealing with the Russian election right now. That's a foregone conclusion. But in other countries around the world, think about how Slovakia took a very sharp turn after Fico, or how Poland could kind of move away from where their deep support, or what could happen in various other countries. Trump in the United States, what could happen there? Culture, heritage, and historical memory are also fields of combat. Stop. This is really, really important. It's the Gerasimov doctrine and applied to things that we don't generally think about. We think about propaganda being a field of warfare, but we're not thinking necessarily about heritage or history being a field of combat, and it really is. When we see how Russia is falsifying not only history but all information, it's important to speak out about it very loudly. That's right. Because what did Putin do in his interview with Tucker Carlson except weaponize history to try to twist it and contort it, to feed his narrative, to be at his service, to support his view of the Russian state narrative? He was using history. He was lying through history. Information is being used by Russia to convince their society and sway public opinion in other European countries. Now we have a situation where we're blocking Russian television channels in EU territory. Okay, they're doing that there. I'm really much more liberal about the use of information, and I watch RT regularly, but I'm watching RT in order to understand what they're saying, and I generally don't think that RT should be banned. However, if I was in Lithuania or Estonia, where there's a clear and present danger like there is with Russia right on their doorstep, literally, I might be thinking about this differently. So I'm giving that caveat. Our foreign partners often ask us which criteria Russian information can be considered as disinformation. That's a good question. These days, it's very important to stress that any information, from television shows to news to other television productions, coming from Russia is automatically disinformation, propaganda, fake news. We must understand that there is no truth in what Russia tries to say. Now, that's really important. I saw I'm trying to see if it was a video or an article or something. I read something, I think it was about 6 months ago, where this guy was talking about how he spent 24 hours just imbibing Russian state TV. And his conclusion was it wasn't even in the news that it was coming through. It was coming through in the news, but it wasn't just that. In every TV show, every soap opera, every comedy, whatever it was, everything, there was like this implicit propaganda that was feeding through it. So he gave this example, like you're watching a soap opera and the doctor's talking to someone and, well, you should eat a Crimean turnip. These are the best turnips in the world, and they're full of health value because they're from Crimea. Like, oh, really? So yeah, that propaganda is just pouring through. This fight against disinformation is crucial because we are in a phase of big developments in technology and artificial intelligence. And when AI gets weaponized, it's going to be just game-changing. I mean, you just think about what people can do with AI now when we're in its infancy, and we're going to have an epistemological crisis just by dealing with AI in the West, let alone what Russia is going to do with it. To borrow from the Czech writer Milan Kundera, would you say that Lithuania was, quote, kidnapped from the West, unquote, when it was annexed by the Soviet Union in 1940? Yes, it clearly it was. During the Middle Ages, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania spanned from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. We were the same country as Poland, Ukraine, and Belarus, so basically the same peoples with some intermixing, right? During the Cold War, not only was our freedom taken, but Russia tried to delete history and paint a picture only from the time this imperialism entered our territory. We remember how modern Lithuanian statehood arose after World War I and how we regained our freedom in 1990. It's impossible to delete this memory. Look, the Ukrainians' experience and the Lithuanians' experience are very, very similar here, where they were struggling to have their own country, their own nation state, and then they kept getting squashed. Like they were welcoming Germany as liberators from the Soviets, and then they got beaten by the Germans, and then they got taken over by the Soviets, and then they had to endure until 1990. And so they understand. This is one of the reasons why the Lithuanians and other Baltic states, as well as the Poles, are so hawkish about supporting Ukraine. Once you take a breath of freedom, you never forget it. This is the reason that we understand Ukrainians, and that's right. That's why they're there. How has the war in Ukraine influenced Lithuanian life and culture? The main thing is to think about freedom. We understand more and more that culture plays a big role in this war because it is based on culture. The war, is based on culture and history. Putin is declaring, as he did with that interview with Tucker, an explanation of why Russia is waging war in Ukraine right now. To justify the invasion of Ukraine, Putin has insisted that Russians and Ukrainians are one people, and uniting them is inevitable. Well, I mean, that's a different argument than they're somebody else, we're going over there to take their stuff and enslave their people, which is basically what's actually happening. There are important collaborations taking place with Ukrainian culture and artists. It's important to give them a platform for everyone to see that Ukraine is not defeated, that Ukraine is still fighting, that Ukraine will win, and that we will help them. Okay, I just thought this article was profound. It was useful. You had to hear and understand and embrace what they're saying here about, like, listen, you have to be discerning about what messages are coming through, and even very subtly the Russians will push these messages that no, we're brothers. No, you're not brothers. Brothers shouldn't be doing this kind of thing to each other. No, you're not one people. Ukraine is not Russia, and to say that it is to continue to perpetrate a lie. All right, tell me what you thought about this. Was this worth your time? Would you like to see more like this? Put that in the comments below. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and the coffees. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.